control your life. Imagine waking up tomorrow. Your paycheck hasn't changed. You still work the same job. You still pay the same bills. But somehow, your rent is higher. Your groceries cost more. Buying a house feels impossible. And your taxes never seem to get any lower. Now here's the strange part. None of this happened because of one politician. It wasn't caused by one election. And it definitely wasn't an accident. Behind almost every major decision that shapes your daily life, there is a small group of people most Americans will never meet. People whose names rarely appear on your ballot, but whose influence reaches into the economy, politics, media, technology, and even the price of your morning coffee. So the real question isn't, are billionaires rich? We already know they are. The real question is, how much power does extreme wealth actually buy? And once someone reaches that level of wealth, who has the power to stop them? Most people imagine power looking dramatic. A president giving a speech, Congress voting on a new law, or CEOs making billion-dollar deals inside glass skyscrapers. That's how movies show power. Reality is much quieter. Power often looks like lawyers writing contracts, accountants moving numbers between countries, lobbyists walking through government buildings, investment firms buying companies you've never heard of. None of it looks exciting. But together, these quiet decisions shape the world far more than most headlines ever will. Here's something surprising. The richest Americans don't wake up every morning trying to control your life. Most of them don't need to, because over decades, they've helped build systems that work in their favor automatically. Systems that continue working, whether they're watching or not. And that's exactly what makes them so powerful. Imagine two people. Both earn money, both own businesses, both have to pay taxes. The first person owns a small restaurant. The second person owns companies across 5 countries. The restaurant owner hires one accountant. The billionaire hires hundreds of accountants, dozens of lawyers, private banks, investment advisors, tax specialists, and financial experts whose full-time job is finding legal ways to protect enormous fortunes. Suddenly, the rules aren't exactly the same anymore. The law may apply equally, but the ability to use that law is completely different. That's the difference between being wealthy and having enough wealth to build an entire system around yourself. Most public debates ask questions like, should billionaires exist? Should taxes be higher? Should corporations have more regulations? Those are important questions. But they miss something even bigger. How does wealth become influence? How does money slowly become political power? How does financial success eventually shape the rules everyone else has to follow? Because history shows something fascinating. Every civilization, from ancient Rome to Renaissance Venice to the British Empire, eventually faced the same problem. As wealth became concentrated, so did power. Different countries, different languages, different centuries. The same pattern kept appearing. Maybe you're thinking, I'm not a billionaire, so why should I care? Because this story isn't really about billionaires. It's about you. It's about why buying a home feels harder than it did for previous generations. Why healthcare costs continue climbing. Why wages often struggle to keep pace with inflation. Why giant companies become even larger every year. Why some industries seem almost impossible to compete against. And why major political changes often feel painfully slow, even when millions of people demand them. These problems may look unrelated, but many economists argue they're connected by something much bigger. Not one person, not one company, not one political party. A system. Here's the surprising part. This system wasn't created overnight. It wasn't invented by one billionaire. It wasn't designed in one secret meeting. It evolved slowly, over decades, through thousands of legal decisions, financial innovations, corporate strategies, and political compromises. Most people never noticed it happening, because each individual change looked small. But when you connect them together, an entirely different picture begins to appear. And once you see that picture, it's almost impossible to unsee it. So, if wealth can quietly become influence, what does that influence actually look like? How can a handful of people shape markets, affect governments, change the news we consume, and influence decisions that affect hundreds of millions of lives without ever being elected? The answer begins with an industry that most Americans have never heard of, an industry built around one simple mission: protecting wealth at almost any cost. And once you understand how that machine works, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Imagine you're playing a game. Both players start with the same rules. But halfway through the game, one player quietly hires the people who write the rulebook. Another hires the referee. Another hires the lawyers who explain the rules. And another pays experts to find loopholes no one else even knows exist. Technically, the game is still fair. But in reality, one side has advantages the other could never afford. That's how influence works. Not through one dramatic event, but through thousands of invisible decisions. Money doesn't just buy things. Money buys something much more valuable. Options. If a family loses their income, they might survive for a few months. If a billionaire loses millions, their lifestyle barely changes. That safety creates freedom. Freedom to invest, freedom to take risks, freedom to wait, and eventually, freedom to influence the system itself. This is why economists often say, wealth creates more wealth. But it also creates something else: power. Most people imagine billionaires calling politicians every morning. Reality is usually much less dramatic. Influence happens through networks, business organizations, legal teams, financial advisors, industry experts, public relations firms, policy researchers, lobbyists. Each group performs a different job. Separately, their impact seems small. Together, they can shape entire industries. Imagine trying to move a mountain. One person can't do it. But thousands moving one rock every day eventually change the landscape forever. Here's something many Americans don't realize. Every year, billions of dollars are spent trying to influence government policy. Companies don't simply sell products. Many also spend enormous resources explaining to lawmakers why certain laws should or shouldn't exist. Sometimes they argue lower taxes create jobs. Sometimes they argue more regulation hurts innovation. Sometimes those arguments are true. Sometimes critics strongly disagree. The important point isn't one specific policy. It's that organizations with greater resources can often make their voices heard much more frequently than ordinary citizens. And over time, repeated influence matters. Now think about the news. Every single day, thousands of important stories happen. But only a small number become national headlines. Who decides? Editors, news organizations, algorithms, social media platforms, television producers. None of them necessarily tell people what to think, but they do influence what people think about. That's an enormous difference. If millions of people spend weeks arguing over one story, they're probably ignoring another. Attention has become one of the world's most valuable resources, and the people who control attention often influence everything else. The digital age changed everything 20 years ago. Television shaped public opinion. Today, technology companies shape how information travels. The videos you watch, the posts you see, the advertisements you receive, the recommendations appearing on your phone. Most of these decisions are made by algorithms. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement. Not necessarily truth, not necessarily balance, just attention. Because attention creates clicks. Clicks create advertising revenue, and advertising creates enormous profits. This is why many political debates feel endless. People argue online, campaigns spend billions, elections happen, governments change, yet some economic trends continue almost unchanged. Housing remains expensive, healthcare keeps rising, large corporations become even larger. Many Americans wonder, if elections matter, why do some problems seem impossible to solve? The answer is complicated. Governments absolutely matter. Policies matter. Votes matter. But economic systems move slowly. Large financial interests often have decades to prepare for change. Ordinary voters usually focus on the next election. Major institutions often think decades ahead. And that's a huge advantage. This isn't about one billionaire, or one company, or one political party. It's about understanding incentives. Every system rewards certain behavior. Businesses naturally try to maximize profits. Investors try to maximize returns. Politicians try to win elections. Media companies compete for attention. None of those goals are surprising. The real question is, who benefits when all those incentives point in the same direction? Because sometimes the answer isn't society as a whole. But here's where the story becomes personal. Most people assume this battle only affects billionaires, politicians, and giant corporations. They're wrong. Because the biggest consequences don't happen inside boardrooms. They happen inside ordinary homes. In the price of your groceries, the cost of buying a house, your paycheck, your retirement savings, even the opportunities your children will have one day. Imagine two children. Both are born on the exact same day. One grows up in an ordinary American family. The other is born into one of the richest families on earth. 25 years later, they're both intelligent. They both work hard. They both dream big. But before either of them makes a single decision, one of them already has advantages worth billions of dollars. Not because they're smarter, not because they worked harder, but because wealth doesn't just buy luxury. It buys opportunity. And over time, opportunity becomes power. Most Americans don't wake up thinking about billionaires. They're thinking about something much simpler. Can I afford rent this month? Why is grocery shopping more expensive than last year? Will I ever buy a house? Why does college cost so much? Why is healthcare so expensive? These feel like completely different problems. But economists often point to a common thread. When economic power becomes concentrated, markets become less competitive. And when competition decreases, prices usually rise. Consumers have fewer choices. Workers have less bargaining power. Small businesses struggle to survive. The effects aren't always immediate. They're gradual, quiet, almost invisible. Until one day, everyone notices life has become much more expensive. Think about your daily routine. You wake up. You check your phone. You search the internet. You buy coffee. You order something online. You stream music. You watch videos. You pay with a credit card. By lunchtime, you've probably interacted with products or services connected to just a handful of giant corporations. This isn't necessarily because they're evil. Many became successful by creating products people genuinely wanted. But success creates another advantage. Scale. The bigger a company becomes, the easier it becomes to buy competitors, negotiate lower costs, collect more customer data, and dominate entire markets. Eventually, new competitors stop trying. Because competing against trillion-dollar companies becomes nearly impossible. Now let's talk about something deeply personal. Your home. For decades, buying a house represented the American dream. Today, millions of families feel that dream moving further away. There isn't one simple reason. Interest rates, construction costs, population growth, local housing policies, all matter. But another trend has quietly emerged. Large investment firms have increasingly purchased thousands of residential homes in certain markets. Instead of competing with another family, buyers sometimes compete against organizations with enormous financial resources. Organizations that can make cash offers, buy multiple properties, and wait years for higher returns. For an average family, that's a difficult competition. Think about your job. Years ago, many industries had dozens of competing employers. Today, some industries are dominated by only a few massive companies. When fewer employers compete for workers, employees often have less negotiating power. That doesn't mean every company underpays workers, but basic economics tells us less competition usually means fewer choices. And fewer choices rarely benefit consumers or employees. Now consider your phone. Most people believe they choose what they watch. But modern algorithms make thousands of decisions every day. What appears first? What disappears? What keeps your attention? What makes you angry? What makes you stay online? The longer you stay, the more advertising you see. The more advertising you see, the more money platforms earn. Your attention has become part of the business model. In today's economy, attention may be one of the most valuable resources in the world. Here's what's fascinating. The economy has created extraordinary wealth. Technology has improved our lives in countless ways. Medicine is better. Communication is faster. Innovation continues, and yet millions of people still feel like they're falling behind. Why? Because economic growth and economic opportunity are not always distributed equally. When people see record corporate profits while struggling to pay everyday bills, frustration grows. Trust declines. Communities become divided, and that's when societies begin asking difficult questions. Who benefits most from the current system, and who is paying the hidden cost? History tells us something interesting. Every generation eventually reaches a moment when ordinary people begin questioning whether the rules still feel fair. Sometimes those questions lead to reform. Sometimes they lead to political conflict. Sometimes they reshape entire nations. Which raises one final question. Has America faced this situation before? The answer is yes. More than a century ago, the United States experienced an era where a handful of industrial giants controlled enormous wealth, influenced politics, and reshaped the economy. Many historians believe today's world shares surprising similarities, but history also tells us something else. The last time wealth became this concentrated, America didn't stay the same. Massive reforms followed. Entire industries were broken apart. New laws changed the balance of power. The question is, could history repeat itself? Or has the modern system become too powerful to challenge? Imagine living in America, not today, but 140 years ago. There are no smartphones, no internet, no electric cars. But one thing feels surprisingly familiar. A handful of businessmen own industries so powerful they can influence entire states. Oil, railroads, steel, banking, these companies aren't just successful. They're becoming untouchable. People start asking the same question millions ask today. Who is really running the country? History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but sometimes it rhymes. The late 1800s became known as the Gilded Age. America was growing faster than almost any country on earth. Railroads connected the nation. Factories produced goods at incredible speed. New inventions transformed everyday life. The economy exploded. But the wealth created by that boom didn't reach everyone equally. A small group of industrial giants accumulated fortunes unlike anything America had ever seen. Names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, and Vanderbilt became symbols of unimaginable wealth. Some Americans admired them. Others believed they had become too powerful. Not because they were rich, but because they could influence markets, politics, and even the laws designed to regulate them. Healthy markets depend on competition. If 10 companies compete, they fight for customers. Prices usually stay lower. Innovation moves faster. Service improves. But what happens when one company buys another, then another, and another? Eventually, there may only be 2 or 3 major players left. Now customers have fewer choices. Workers have fewer employers. Small businesses struggle to survive. History shows this pattern again and again. The larger organizations become, the easier it becomes for them to grow even larger. Success creates more success. Power attracts more power. Eventually, ordinary Americans began noticing. Farmers struggled. Factory workers protested. Journalists exposed corruption. Citizens demanded change. The conversation shifted. It was no longer simply, how do we create wealth? It became, how do we make sure wealth doesn't control everything else? That question changed American politics. The government introduced stronger competition laws. Financial regulations expanded. Large monopolies were challenged. The goal wasn't to punish success. The goal was to preserve competition, because without competition, capitalism itself begins to weaken. Now look around. Artificial intelligence, cloud computing, social media, online shopping, digital advertising, space technology. These industries are creating enormous fortunes, just as railroads and oil once did. Again, innovation is changing the world. Again, wealth is becoming increasingly concentrated. Again, people are debating whether large corporations have accumulated too much influence. History doesn't tell us the future, but it does reveal patterns, and many historians believe we may be living through another turning point. Today's power looks different. In the past, control often came from owning railroads, oil fields, or steel factories. Today, power increasingly comes from controlling information, data, artificial intelligence, digital infrastructure, global investment. The world's most valuable resource isn't always oil anymore. Sometimes it's information. Who collects it? Who owns it? Who controls how it's used? That may become one of the defining questions of the next generation. The biggest lesson isn't that rich people are the problem. History never says that. The lesson is much simpler. Whenever power becomes concentrated, whether political, economic, or technological, societies eventually face difficult choices. Do they increase competition? Do they update old laws? Do they build new safeguards? Or do they allow the concentration to continue? Every generation answers those questions differently. Now, it's our generation's turn. For decades, Americans believed the system would naturally balance itself. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. Today, new technologies are moving faster than governments can regulate them. Artificial intelligence is advancing at record speed. Corporate mergers continue. Global wealth keeps expanding. The world is changing faster than ever before. Which raises one final question. If history has already shown us what happens when wealth becomes too powerful, why does it keep happening? Maybe the biggest reason isn't money. Maybe it's human nature. Maybe every generation believes this time is different. But is it? Or are we watching the beginning of another chapter that future history books haven't written yet? So, after everything we've explored, one question remains. Can any of this actually change? Or is this simply the way the world works? History gives us an interesting answer. Every generation has believed the people at the top were too powerful to challenge. And yet, history keeps proving that no system lasts forever. There was a time when child labor was considered normal, a time when giant monopolies seemed impossible to break, a time when ordinary workers had almost no rights. People believed those systems would never change. But they did. Not overnight. Not because of one politician. Not because of one billionaire. But because millions of ordinary people slowly demanded something better. History rarely changes in a single moment. It changes because small ideas become powerful movements. The biggest lesson isn't that billionaires are the enemy. Innovation matters. Business matters. Success matters. The real lesson is much simpler. No one should become so powerful that the rules stop applying to them. Because when accountability disappears, trust disappears. And when trust disappears, society becomes divided. Strong economies don't just create wealth, they create opportunity, fair competition, and rules that apply equally to everyone. The future hasn't been decided yet. Artificial intelligence, new technologies, and global business will reshape the next generation. The question isn't whether billionaires will continue to exist. They will. The real question is, what kind of society will we build around that wealth? One where opportunity belongs to everyone, or one where power becomes concentrated in fewer and fewer hands? That decision doesn't belong to billionaires alone. It belongs to voters, lawmakers, business leaders, and ordinary people who choose to stay informed. Because history shows something remarkable. The biggest changes never begin inside boardrooms. They begin when ordinary people start asking better questions. The next chapter of this story hasn't been written yet. Maybe future generations will look back at this moment as the beginning of a fairer system. Or maybe they'll see it as the moment we ignored the warning signs. The choice is still ours. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more stories that explain the hidden forces shaping our world. Because the better we understand the system, the better prepared we are to change it.